Anyone recognizes this band from Germany? Long time ago. Aren't you? Must. The founders of electronic music. And what did they say? In 1977, they had this famous song about the robots. Remember? Yeah? And what they said actually, we are the robots. We are programmed just to do anything you want us to. Now we heard this morning with Singularity arriving shortly. I've heard 2030, there's different assumptions. Some say 2045. This might no longer be the case. It might be the reverse. And what does that imply for the public sector? Just one example, and a very catching one for the public service, and how it might be affected, and for disruptive technologies. Now, if we look at 2017, I'm sure you've heard about that, we have the friendly robot Amelia. Of course, she's female now, with gender balancing and gender mainstreaming becoming mainstream. It's the female robot Amelia. And she is actually working in a local council in London, trying to integrate with her human fellow colleagues and to take over routine tasks in the customer service for public service. So a couple of years later, the picture we imagine in music, in art, with the robots, and you should watch the video because it's really funny, like in Star Trek, how they animate the robots in the pictures, they have of how they're going to develop. This is becoming a reality. It's only a testing phase, but she's there. Now, we've heard this morning discussions about disruption and what it means, and I'm a lawyer. I have a legal background, and in addition, I have a linguistic background. So what I do is go back to the books, or to the e-books these days, and I checked the word disruptive again. We know it means innovative, groundbreaking, but it also means causing or tending to cause disruption, and disruption, and we've heard it this morning in the discussion about, do we have to change the rules? Will the rules have to be changed? Well, in any case, it will cause disturbances and problems or challenges which interrupt our daily lives, our processes, activities, events. So when it comes to the task of the public service, I think also we've been touching about this morning, the different roles of the public service, of the government, of the state have to be kept in mind. We have to distinguish, and we heard it very clearly also in our presentation by our distinguished minister this morning, the different roles the government takes to deal with technology, and in particular disruptive technologies. On the one hand, as promoter and innovator, and we have seen the examples, what you're planning to do this morning in Sri Lanka, and the role as the regulator, and the role as the user. The regulator, basically safeguarding the public interest and balancing interests of the stakeholders in a society, usually having a legal mandate, a mandate to pass the laws from a constitution or any kind of system you might have as a basis. And then the role of the user, and I think that's our main focus here in the discussions, but I think also we will have to be touching upon the questions of the regulator's role. We heard our speaker in the panel from Estonia, Ivar Talo, who was talking about the risks and the threats that we have to deal with those. For example, when it comes to data protection. So the regulators are called to take action. For the promoter and innovator also, we hear quite often that it's the private sector who's more prepared to take risks. But if you look at it more carefully, and you might have come across, Mariana Mazzacato's recent book on the entrepreneurial state, and she argues that the biggest risks and the biggest innovations have usually been taken by the public sector, by the state. And the thing is that you have here not the pressure, to make the money, but you have more patient, if you will, budgets of financing. And also you have examples like GSM or like the internet itself, that was basically the public sector, government, that actually drove and financed this innovation. So when it comes to the role of the government, we have to keep these three aspects in mind. And when it comes to the user, that's the one that we are looking at in more details, in interaction in particular with the regulator. We have principles, rules that we don't want to see changed. Rules on accountability, no matter what disruptive technologies we have, but the principles have to stay in place, right? Conservative, yes, the public service is conservative, and I've spent many years in the public service myself, so, and in a country, I was born, and I'm originally from Austria, a country that's rather risk-averse, so public servant, Austrian, legal background, is probably the worst to get in taking risk, and when it comes to being open to the positive side of the developments, which hopefully is not reflected in our report. But we tend to see the negative sides and the risks only, not so much as we've heard this morning from our speaker from the future government in Dubai, the positive sides of what disruptive technologies can offer. One thing that probably has not been mentioned, but I think we have to keep in mind when we talk about the public service as the user, but I think it's obvious and it's evident, but I would like to still raise it. It's about co-creation. Increasingly, technologies are enabling us to co-create public services, to co-decide with the government, with the private sector. That includes the citizens. So again, we have a paradigm shift, we have some transformation on the processes, on the rules of the game, and that goes back to the question or the issue discussed this morning. Yes, rules will be changed, rules are changing, but that's more, let's say, on the operational side, in a sense of keeping our principles and keeping the basic functions of what the public service we should do. I think we should keep the principles and rules that we have established. However, one of the issues we have to keep in mind is also when it comes to regulating in the public service, if you regulate too early, if you regulate too much, you might prevent innovation. If you don't, the risks might have an impact that you probably are not willing to or have never been thinking of or have not planned. So in that sense, it is really important, and we heard that also in the morning. Does it work? Oops, no, that was too much. It is important to watch out what's on the horizon in terms of technology developments. And it's important for governments, in particular as their role also as the promoter of innovation, but in all other roles like regulator and user, to watch out what's on the horizon. And there's plenty of technology foresight studies available. And for example, if you look at Gartner, technology trends for the upcoming years are, and we've heard that already, artificial intelligence everywhere. The next one is immersive experiences, which means that the relationship between the humans and the machines will be blurred and intertwined. And the third one is the rise of ecosystems, of digital platforms. These three sort of developments we should be watching out are connected to different types of technologies, and we'll have a chance to look into those in our parallel sessions later this afternoon. Now, Gartner also talks about the hype cycle, or has designed the hype cycle that sort of describes the life cycle of a technology in 5 phases, and I think this topic will be taken up also in the next session. But we have to bear in mind, and that's one of the questions that what the public service decision makers will have to keep in mind is, what does it mean to be a pioneer? What does it mean to be an early adopter, or do I wait for mainstream use when it's already safe and secured and I have Yeah? So what does it mean? I'm not going to give you any answers because the report is not ready and the discussions have only started. And also I find it very difficult to give you a general answer. Now, one of the issues we've also tried, and I think it's relevant, very relevant for the debate, and we've heard it this morning, is linking these technology trends and disruptive technology trends to the Sustainable Development Goals. Altogether, 17 of them. It is very difficult because they are not really explicitly mentioned, except for a few goals where you find them specifically referred to. But one of the goals that we find particularly important in our context is Goal 16 and Goal 11. We've heard about it, and 9, of course, which includes infrastructures, innovation, and smart cities, sustainable cities. We've heard about it, and of course 16 about the institutions and rule of the law and justice. What we've done for the purpose of the conference, and this is also how the paper sort of continues and lays out the main technology trends, opportunities, and tries to also summarize risks, is 4 clusters. And these 4 clusters you will find in the afternoon sessions again. It's they are actually based on discussions that UNDP, the Global Center, had, and they did a small survey among their peers, among their colleagues, to find out what were the most relevant sort of technology areas, clusters in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and development work. And we came up with these 4: electronic identity, trust services, cybersecurity, and of course the blockchain. Connectivity and infrastructure, which includes also cloud computing, the Internet of Things, smart infrastructures and smart cities, big data, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. As I've mentioned before, probably the most disruptive is considered artificial intelligence, what we can see from discussions, what we can see from foresight studies, but we'll have a closer look at the different clusters now. We've also heard this morning, when it comes to electronic identity, trust and cybersecurity, clearly the SDGs call in their target 16.9 for an identity, legal identity for all. This is very relevant for people to be citizens and be able to participate in democratic processes, to achieve services, and they should have this identity from birth onwards, so birth registration. We've heard, I'm not going to go into details, but electronic identity and electronic identity management is becoming more and more mainstream. We've heard also the example, for example, in Estonia, where it's also being used in electronic voting. And we also know that we need a number of other building blocks in place, as Ivar from Estonia has mentioned before. Yes, access, of course, but also, the infrastructure and trust services, which means we need to have electronic signatures, electronic seals, and time stamping, for example. And we need to have cyber security, network security, data, information management security in place. We've seen, however, that with the use or emergence of e-government, e-governance, e-services, an increased vulnerability. On the one hand, e-services have brought, and the use of e-identity, lots of efficiency gains in the public service. We have, for example, now also in the European Union, a framework law that enables businesses to do online transactions using their national identities, and they're recognized mutually, using them for cross-border dealings, transactions. The Estonians, who are holding the presidency of the European Union at the moment, are very much pushing that we're making progress here. But we have also seen, and Estonia has been advocating that as well. If you go for e-services, I think it was your prime minister who said that if you're going for e-services, you have to have a cybersecurity policy in place. You cannot do without. So it's on the one hand the individual that is threatened by identity theft. But online fraud, but you also have, of course, cyber attacks on the system. And I think, again, here, Estonia was one of the first victims to a massive cyber attack in 2005, Ivar, I think, yeah, or 2006. And also here leading the path in designing cybersecurity policies. So cybersecurity is becoming a must. It's becoming more important also for developing countries, because what we have seen in the past, in the recent past, is that hackers are using some of the developing countries who are less protected as test grounds to launch their malicious ware in these environments that they can then use against companies or against states. Distributed ledger has been mentioned as one of the solutions, blockchain, to really provide more security, to provide a different way of working, to cut out intermediaries in transactions. And we've heard, for example, blockchain initiatives from Dubai. We have heard Georgia, who's experimenting with land registries. So blockchain is an emerging technology. We still have issues here about scalability, about standardization and security, but we'll see how this can solve many of the security problems as well, but also provide a paradigm shift in how we are using intermediaries in many different areas. Connectivity, infrastructure, and the cloud is another cluster we are going to look into. And here we've heard also examples. We have heard how important it is to provide access. We know that this is a problem to have universal coverage in many countries that don't have the infrastructure in place. But there are solutions, as we've heard this morning, for example, with nanosatellites, or using TV and radio frequencies that are not used, that are low cost and easier to employ. And also, IoT applications would work, and we have examples of this in this area. Cloud computing is another aspect that will help. But again, we have a problem that might arise. We have a risk that's the dominance, probably, and the dependence on big tech companies and providers. We have security risks, particularly still with the cloud computing, and we have problems with the supply of energy and connectivity to power grids that might arise here. Internet of Things is another cluster, and it includes smart cities. Very briefly, in short, we're talking here about all things connected via digital ecosystems and platforms. It's no longer just a mobile, but maybe my check-it might in the future, tell me the way to go, might be the entrance thing for a supermarket where I can buy stuff, or it might be my check-it that allows me to attend a club or something. So the check-it might be the one that is also measuring my health status and what have you. All kinds of smart wearables will be connected and will have huge amounts of data coming from these wearables, sensors, and all things smart connected to the internet. Well, that means, again, vulnerabilities in terms of security, cybersecurity will increase. And also, that has been mentioned before, what will happen to our privacy if my check-it is watching over me and telling me what I should eat in the morning? I know I'm exaggerating. So governments are already aware of that, and we need to have policy in place to mitigate these risks. Plus, for seamless IoT, we will need to agree on international standards. Brings me to the last point. All things connected means also our buddy, Parrot, might be connected and order online products via Alexa, because Alexa will recognize his name, the voice of his owner, the lady. So you probably heard this story from the UK. Again, we should try to avoid also the pitfalls of this kind of development. But it brings me to the next topic, and the last topic, basically, which is about big data and artificial intelligence. We've heard a lot about it, and we'll hear more about it. Artificial intelligence, yes, will be a helpful tool to support the government and the public sector for routine processes. It can help with the use, the good use of big data, policymakers, decision makers to take informed decisions. But one thing and threat that looms in the dark is that the machine should not take over. We have to all the times somehow make sure that we keep the oversight, and that the oversight is a human task and the task of the government, because ultimately the relationship is with the government and the citizen, and not so much the machine and the individual. Finally, just to summarize, and we're working on that because, as I said before, we would like to draw also some lessons from this event and come up with some policy recommendations if possible. But one thing that has become clear already in the morning, it is very important to watch what is on the horizon and to use technology foresight for government to assess the risks and opportunities, to decide, should I be an early adopter? Should I pioneer? Should I wait for the mainstream? What are the opportunities? What are the framework conditions? Reconsider. Do we have to change rules? Do we have to add new rules? And when do we have to add them? And what about the balance between the interests? We have heard already about the role and the importance of education in this whole exercise. The skills of the workforce in the public sector. And we should have in mind always the social, economic, and political impacts. And we should not forget, and we have heard that also from our Estonian colleague here, to try to find a balance in public-private partnerships and in this venture. With regard to the SDGs, again, it's all the more important to align enabling technologies with development priorities, and not just one. It's very difficult. We tried to do this exercise in the course of the preparation of the study to allocate specific development goals to any one of these clusters, but it's very difficult. You can say one is priority, but then they're all affected, and you should look at them all together. And technology is not the only thing, so look into what foundations are required and look into international cooperation. We have heard this morning that some of the issues cannot be solved on the national or local level alone. We need international cooperation, but also look into international practice, good and bad if you can find it, so failure. Because in other words, my final recommendation, or one of the recommendations I can give you already now, is look before you leapfrog. Thank you very much.